Right now, somewhere in Scandinavia, thousands of people are opening DNA ancestry reports on their phones. Many of them expect to see one simple answer. You are Nordic. It sounds straightforward: one land, one people, one ancient bloodline. But that isn't what modern science is finding anymore. Over the last few years, ancient DNA research has completely rewritten the story of Nordic origins. Skeletons recovered from Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Finland are now being compared with the DNA of millions of living people using technology that didn't exist just a decade ago. And the results have surprised even the scientists. The DNA doesn't point to one ancient Nordic population. Instead, it reveals thousands of years of migration, isolation, survival, and unexpected mixing between completely different groups of people. The familiar image of the tall, blonde Viking with a single ancestral bloodline is beginning to disappear. In its place is a story far older, far more complicated, and far more fascinating. Today, researchers can sequence DNA from skeletons that are more than 10,000 years old. Every ancient genome becomes another page in humanity's forgotten history. And nowhere has this revolution changed history more dramatically than Scandinavia. The real question is no longer, who were the Vikings? The real mystery is, who lived in Scandinavia before the Vikings even existed? To answer that question, we have to travel back to a world where Northern Europe looked nothing like it does today. Nearly 20,000 years ago, almost the entire Scandinavian peninsula was buried beneath massive sheets of ice. Some glaciers stretched more than 2 kilometers thick. Temperatures remained brutally cold, and almost no humans could survive there permanently. From space, if anyone had been watching, Scandinavia would have looked like a giant white continent. There were no forests, no villages, no kingdoms. No Vikings, only ice. For thousands of years, nature completely controlled this land, but the Earth was changing. Around 12,000 years ago, the climate slowly began to warm. The glaciers started retreating northward. Rivers formed where walls of ice once stood. New plants appeared across the landscape, followed by animals searching for fresh grazing land. Reindeer moved first, then elk, then wild horses, and wherever animals traveled, humans followed. For generations, archaeologists believed the first settlers entered Scandinavia from the south after the ice melted. It seemed like the obvious explanation, but ancient DNA would eventually reveal something very different. Scientists studying skeletons from Sweden and Norway discovered that the earliest Scandinavians were not descendants of just one migrating group. Instead, at least 2 completely different populations entered the region from different directions. One group traveled north through Central Europe. Another moved along the ice-free Atlantic coastline from the northeast. They had different genetic histories, different hunting traditions, different stone tools. For centuries, these populations lived separately. Eventually, their paths crossed. Instead of replacing one another, they began living together. Their children inherited DNA from both populations. This mixing created one of the earliest unique Scandinavian genetic communities. It was a discovery that completely challenged decades of archaeological theory. But scientists weren't finished. As more skeletons were analyzed, another mystery appeared. The first Scandinavians didn't necessarily look the way most people imagine today. Popular culture often portrays ancient Nordic people as having blonde hair, blue eyes, and very light skin. Ancient DNA paints a more complex picture. Some of the earliest hunter-gatherers carried genes associated with blue eyes while still having darker skin pigmentation. Others had lighter skin but darker hair. These combinations seem unusual today, but they were perfectly normal. Thousands of years ago, human appearance was still evolving as populations adapted to different environments. Natural selection works slowly. Generation after generation, traits that offered advantages became more common. In Northern Europe, one of the biggest environmental pressures was sunlight. Long winters and limited ultraviolet radiation created conditions where lighter skin became increasingly beneficial because it helped the body produce vitamin D more efficiently. This transformation did not happen overnight. It unfolded over thousands of years. Every generation looked slightly different from the one before. Meanwhile, Scandinavia itself continued changing. Dense forests replaced open tundra, lakes formed across the landscape, fish became abundant. Coastal communities developed remarkable hunting skills. People built boats capable of navigating rivers, lakes, and icy coastlines. Long before the Viking Age, Scandinavians were already becoming expert travelers. Their survival depended on understanding nature better than almost anyone else in Europe. They followed migrating animals. They adapted to changing seasons. They learned which plants could be eaten. They mastered fishing in freezing waters. Every year demanded new strategies. Only the most adaptable families survived. That constant struggle left its mark inside their DNA. Modern genetic research has identified several genes that became increasingly common in northern populations because they improved survival under harsh environmental conditions. But then, another wave of people arrived, and once again, Scandinavia's genetic history changed forever. For thousands of years, the first hunter-gatherers dominated Scandinavia. They survived freezing winters, hunted across vast forests, and built communities that understood one of the harshest environments on Earth. It seemed as though their way of life would continue unchanged. But around 6,000 years ago, new people began appearing along the southern coasts of Scandinavia. They brought something the North had never seen before. Farming. These newcomers didn't simply carry different tools. They carried different DNA. Ancient genome sequencing has shown that Europe's first farmers traced much of their ancestry back to Anatolia in present-day Turkey. Over generations, they spread across Europe, bringing crops, domesticated animals, pottery, and a completely new way of life. Eventually, they reached Denmark and southern Sweden. At first, the hunter-gatherers and farmers lived side by side. Archaeological evidence suggests that they traded with one another. They observed each other's lifestyles. For centuries, both cultures coexisted. Then something changed. Intermarriage began. Families merged. Entire communities slowly blended together. The genetic map of Scandinavia started shifting once again. But before this transformation was complete, another migration reshaped northern Europe. About 5,000 years ago, groups associated with the Yamnaya pastoralists from the Pontic-Caspian steppe expanded across Europe. Their arrival left one of the strongest genetic signatures ever detected by ancient DNA. Modern Scandinavians still carry a substantial portion of this steppe ancestry. Researchers were astonished by how quickly this ancestry spread. Within only a few centuries, the genetic landscape of much of Europe had changed dramatically. Scandinavia became a meeting place of three major ancestral populations: the ancient hunter-gatherers, the early farmers, and the steppe herders. The Nordic people were not created by one migration. They emerged from thousands of years of mixing between these different populations. As DNA databases expanded, scientists noticed something even more surprising. The Viking Age, beginning around the late 8th century, did not represent a genetically isolated society. Large-scale studies of Viking-era genomes revealed remarkable diversity. Some Vikings carried ancestry linked to southern Europe. Others showed Eastern Baltic connections. Some even had genetic links extending toward the British Isles. The image of every Viking looking exactly alike simply wasn't supported by the evidence. The Viking world was connected through exploration, trade, settlement, and migration. People moved across enormous distances. Genes moved with them. One of the most fascinating discoveries involved physical appearance. Modern Scandinavia is often associated with blonde hair and blue eyes, yet ancient DNA shows these traits became common gradually, rather than appearing all at once. Natural selection, climate, and thousands of years of population mixing all played important roles. There was never a single moment when the Nordic look suddenly appeared. It evolved generation after generation, century after century. Today, scientists continue sequencing ancient genomes from across Scandinavia. Every new skeleton has the potential to answer one question while creating several new ones. Some discoveries confirm earlier theories. Others completely overturn them. This is what makes genetics so powerful. Unlike legends, DNA doesn't preserve myths. It preserves biological history. That history tells us Scandinavia was never isolated from the rest of Europe. Its people interacted with neighboring populations for thousands of years. They adapted, they migrated, they survived. And they changed. Modern Norwegians, Swedes, Danes, Icelanders, and many Finns all carry echoes of these ancient migrations. Each person's DNA is like a living archive, a record written not with words, but with genes passed from one generation to the next. Perhaps the greatest lesson from ancient DNA is that identity is rarely simple. The Nordic story is not about one people replacing another. It is about thousands of years of human resilience, adaptation, and connection. The glaciers melted, new lands emerged, people arrived from different directions, cultures met, families formed, and together they created the genetic foundations of modern Scandinavia. The next time someone says the Nordic people came from a single ancient bloodline, the evidence tells a different story. A story hidden beneath frozen soil, inside forgotten skeletons, and encoded within DNA that waited thousands of years to reveal the truth. As sequencing technology continues to improve, scientists believe even more discoveries lie ahead. Some ancient graves have never been studied genetically. Others remain buried beneath forests, mountains, and melting glaciers. Each new discovery could reshape our understanding once again, because history is no longer written only in books. It is written inside every cell of the human body. And the story of Nordic origins is still being uncovered, one ancient genome at a time.